Heidi, the Alpine girl. In a big and beautiful mountain called the Alps, the sun shone brightly in the clear sky on a hot June morning. Little Heidi walked slowly on a mountain path, following her aunt, Dete. Heidi was going to her new home. She was just 6 years old, so her steps were small and tough. Aunt Dete and Heidi walked through the village, on their way up the mountain. The villagers sometimes stopped to ask questions because they were curious. "Is this the girl your sister left when she passed away? Where are you taking her?" one person asked. With a sad heart, Aunt Dete said, "Yes, this is Heidi. I'm taking her to live with her grandfather. I got a job in the city, and I can't take care of her anymore." The villagers felt sorry for Heidi. While Aunt Dete talked to the villagers, Heidi had a chance to explore. She met a boy named Peter, who took care of the village's goats. Every morning, Peter took the goats to the mountains to eat. Now, Heidi was following Peter with curiosity, even though it was hot and her clothes were heavy. The hot sun made Heidi's clothes very uncomfortable, so she decided to take them off. She took off her heavy clothes and was left with just her undergarments. She felt free and started running after Peter, and they both smiled. When Aunt Dete came back from the conversation with some villagers, she saw Heidi in her undergarments. Aunt Dete was surprised and asked, "Where are your clothes?" Heidi, still happy, said, "I don't need them, Aunt Dete. I want to run like the goats." Dete scolded Heidi for being impulsive and asked Peter to get her clothes. They kept walking and climbing the mountain for another hour until they reached the top. On top of the mountain, there was Heidi's grandfather's small house, surrounded by the beautiful nature. Heidi ran to the old man, excited to meet him, and shook his hand. "Hello, grandfather," she said. The old man took her hand and looked at her young face. "Good morning," he replied, his old face showing a kind smile. Aunt Dete tried to explain why they had come. "Heidi needs to stay with you, father. I found a job in the city, and I can't take care of her anymore." The old man's reply was not very friendly. "You can go now," he said. Aunt Dete left quickly, leaving Heidi behind at her new home. Heidi was excited to explore her new place. She looked around and asked, "Where can I sleep, grandfather?" Her voice was full of curiosity. The old man, who was not very kind when she arrived, now seemed less strict. "You can sleep anywhere you like," he told her, and he pointed to a ladder behind the bed. Heidi climbed up the ladder and found herself in a cozy loft filled with sweet-smelling hay. She loved her new sleeping place because it felt rustic and charming. "I'll sleep up here," she decided, still full of her usual enthusiasm. Heidi became her grandfather's constant companion and joined him in his daily activities. She was fascinated by her grandfather's skills and watched with wonder as he made a chair just for her. When the sun went down and cast a golden light on the mountain tops, they heard the familiar whistle of the village goat herder, Peter. It was the signal for bringing the goats back to the village. Heidi's heart raced with excitement when she recognized Peter's call. She had spent many days with him in the mountains, and they had become warm friends. They continued to have carefree adventures in the Alps. Heidi's sense of wonder was always alive as she picked wildflowers, played with the goats, and enjoyed the freedom of the mountains. The old man's 2 goats, Daisy and Dusky, became dear to Heidi. She made a special promise to take care of a little goat who had lost its mother, and she kept that promise close to her heart. During the summertime, the warm sun and the beauty of the mountains made Heidi feel alive. She became stronger and healthier every day, and her laughter filled the Alpine meadows. Her life felt as limitless as the wide horizon. When autumn came and the air turned crisp with the scent of falling leaves, Heidi's grandfather decided it was time to keep her safe from the cold winds in the Alps. The mountains could be dangerous in winter. As the first snowflakes fell, Heidi stayed inside their mountain home. She helped her grandfather make cheese and learned important skills. She enjoyed the cozy warmth of their snug hut. As the seasons changed, winter came, and the village turned into a snowy wonderland. Peter, who used to be her constant companion in the mountains, started going to school in the valley. Heidi spent her winter days doing other things. But Heidi's heart remained light because she knew the mountains would welcome her back in spring, and her days were still filled with joy on the mountainside. One day, when Peter was busy with his studies, he came to visit Heidi with some news. His grandmother wanted to meet Heidi, and she was excited to go. But there was a problem: deep snow covered the ground in winter. Heidi's grandfather said it was too dangerous to go down to the valley. Days passed, and the snowstorms outside were strong. Heidi really wanted to meet Peter's grandmother, make a new friend, and see what the valley was like. But the snow was deep, and the storms didn't stop. Finally, the sun came out and the snow stopped. Heidi's grandfather thought it was safe for her to go outside. Heidi was so happy. She put on her warm winter clothes and hopped onto her grandfather's wooden sled. They laughed all the way down the mountain, and it echoed in the mountains. The sled went down the mountain fast, and Heidi reached the valley below. She saw the village and the beautiful alpine landscape. It was a winter adventure she would always remember. When Heidi arrived, she met Peter's grandmother. She welcomed Heidi with kindness. Even though she couldn't see, Granny's smile and gentle touch made Heidi feel like she belonged. Heidi asked her why she couldn't see, and Granny replied, "I can't see, dear, but I can hear. My ears help me enjoy the beauty of life." Heidi was amazed by Granny's wisdom and kindness, and they became good friends. In the following days, Heidi spent time with Granny, who told stories and taught her important things about life. Sometimes, Heidi's grandfather came to visit, fixing things in Granny's small home. Winter continued to be beautiful, and their friendship grew stronger. Heidi's presence brought joy to Granny, Peter, and her grandfather. The mountains kept her happy, and the valley gave her new friends and wonderful memories. Heidi found a special place in this world of beauty, love, and wonder. Towards the end of Heidi's second winter with her grandfather, a visitor came to their hut. It was the village pastor and teacher. He was concerned that Heidi wasn't going to school. He asked her grandfather to let her go to school. But Heidi's grandfather said, "Heidi doesn't need school. She's growing up here with the goats and the birds. They won't teach her anything bad." The pastor and teacher said she should learn to read and write. They argued about this, but Heidi's grandfather didn't change his mind. The next day, Heidi's Aunt Deet came with an interesting offer. She said, "I have a great opportunity for Heidi. She's going to live with a rich family in Frankfurt. She will be a friend to their little girl." Heidi's grandfather was direct. "Heidi is happy here. She doesn't need to go to Frankfurt." Aunt Deet said, "This is a chance for Heidi to go to school." "Okay," her grandfather shouted. "Then take her, but don't come back again." Heidi was worried about leaving her grandfather and going to Frankfurt. But Aunt Deet told her they would be back in a day or two. She even said Heidi could bring some fresh bread for Granny, who couldn't eat hard black bread. This made Heidi feel a little better. Quickly, they left the village, and Heidi couldn't even say goodbye to Peter. Dieet brought Heidi to a large house in Frankfurt owned by a wealthy man named Mr. Sesame. His daughter, Clara, was in a wheelchair because of her bad health. As her mother had passed away, taking care of Clara was Miss Rottenmeier's responsibility now. Miss Rottenmeier examined Heidi closely and didn't like her old clothes, hat, or even her name. She thought the name Heidi was unsuitable. A proper name is Adelaide, Miss Rottenmeier said. Aunt Dieet agreed, then we will call her Adelaide. Later, when Miss Rottenmeier wasn't around, Clara told Heidi, "You can call yourself Heidi if you like." "It's okay." Heidi said, "I will go home tomorrow with some fresh bread." Clara said, "No, you came here to keep me company all day long." Heidi was happy to find fresh bread on her plate and put it in her pocket. But when a servant named Sebastian brought a meal for Heidi, she didn't know how to eat in such a formal setting. Miss Rottenmeier tried to teach Heidi proper table manners for a long time. But during the lesson, Heidi fell asleep. When she woke up, she was confused and scared. She remembered she was in Frankfurt. Several days later, while Clara was resting, Heidi went for a walk. Sebastian suggested she climb the church tower to see the city view. When she reached the top, she saw a sea of buildings without the mountains and trees she was used to. She felt disappointed. To cheer Heidi up, the church keeper showed her a basket of kittens and said, "You can have them. I'll bring them to your house." Heidi was thrilled and asked, "Can I have two?" The keeper gave her 2 kittens. When she got home, everyone welcomed her. But Miss Rottenmeier was not happy. She didn't like cats, and when she heard a noise from Heidi's pocket, she screamed. The next morning, there was a knock at the door. Sebastian arrived with a big basket, and Clara opened it, letting the kittens run around. They were full of energy, and one curious kitten even climbed up Miss Rottenmeier's skirt, which made her very upset. That evening, Miss Rottenmeier decided to punish Heidi. She said, "I will lock you in the cold basement." Clara asked her to wait until her father came home to decide what to do, and Miss Rottenmeier reluctantly agreed. For the next few days, Heidi tried hard to stay out of trouble, but she was starting to feel homesick. After returning from a business trip, Mr. Sesame came home with gifts for his daughter, Clara. He was happy to see Heidi and Clara getting along so well. Their friendship brought him a lot of joy. But as days went by, Miss Rottenmeier began saying bad things about Heidi to Mr. Sesame. She told him about times when she thought Heidi caused trouble. Mr. Sesame went to talk to Miss Rottenmeier. He said firmly, "Heidi will stay. She is a wonderful friend for Clara." A few days later, Mr. Sesame went on another business trip, and Grandmama Sesame came to visit. Heidi really liked her because she was kind. One day, Grandmama tried to help Heidi read. She showed her a picture book with a boy herding goats on a mountain. Seeing the picture made Heidi think of Peter and the mountains. She started to cry because she missed home so much. Grandmama saw how much Heidi wanted to go back home. So, she made a promise. She told Heidi that she could have the picture book when she learned to read. This made Heidi very determined. She prayed every night to be able to read and go back home. After a week of hard work, Grandmama heard Heidi reading to Clara. She was so happy about Heidi's progress that she gave her the picture book, just like she promised. After Grandmama left, some strange things started happening at night. Every morning, the front door of the house was wide open, even though Sebastian locked it every night. It was a mystery that confused everyone. Sebastian and another servant decided to stay up one night to figure out why the door kept opening. While they were watching, the wind blew out their candle, and they were left in the dark. Then, the door opened again, and they saw a small figure in white clothes running up the stairs. They were scared and believed it was a ghost. The news spread, and soon everyone in the house thought the place was haunted. Mr. Sesame wanted to find out what was happening. He and his friend, Dr. Clausen, stayed up one night to see why the door opened. When it happened again, they saw that the person in white was Heidi. Mr. Sesame asked, "What are you doing, Heidi?" Heidi looked confused and said, "I don't know. I dream. I'm back with grandfather." Dr. Clausen explained that Heidi was sleepwalking because she missed her home so much. He said the best way to help her was to send her back to her grandfather. The next day, Mr. Sesame made plans to send Heidi back to the mountains. Clara was sad about it, but her father promised that she could visit Heidi with Grandmama soon. Heidi and Sebastian started their journey back to Heidi's village. When they arrived, everyone was amazed that Heidi had come back to live with her grandfather. Heidi first went to visit Peter, Granny, and handed Granny a basket of fresh bread. After that, she hurried up the mountain to see her grandfather, who was sitting outside the hut, just like the first time they met. When she reached her grandfather, she hugged him and cried out, "Grandfather!" Her grandfather, with tears in his eyes, said, "So you've come back." That night, Heidi slept in her old loft bed, feeling safe and comfortable in the place she missed. The next day, her grandfather had exciting news. He told her, "Get dressed in your best clothes, Heidi. We're going to church." They went to the village church, and her grandfather talked to the pastor. He told the pastor that they would move to the village for the winter, and Heidi would go to school. The villagers were surprised to see the pastor and her grandfather talking and becoming friends. Her grandfather had changed a lot since Heidi came back. On their way back from the church, he said, "I never thought I would be this happy again." Heidi had brought happiness back into his life. Peter often invited Heidi to join him in taking care of the goats, but she was usually busy with her chores and looking forward to her friends from Frankfurt visiting. One day, as she looked down the mountain, she saw someone coming. It was Dr. Clausen. Heidi and her grandfather welcomed him warmly. Heidi asked about Clara and Grandmama, and Dr. Clausen explained that Clara was sick and couldn't visit until spring when the weather was better. This news made Heidi sad, but she was happy to see Dr. Clausen. That winter, Heidi and her grandfather moved to the village and rented a small house. Heidi missed the mountains, but she was excited to go to school and study her lessons. Peter, on the other hand, rarely went to school. One day, Heidi asked Peter why he missed school so often. Peter said, "I couldn't stop the sled. It went straight through the village. I couldn't get off, and when I could, it was too late for school." Grandfather warned Peter sternly, "If you do that again, you'll be in trouble with me." During a visit to Granny, they found out she was very sick and couldn't get out of bed. Heidi read to her to cheer her up. Heidi thought Peter should learn to read so he could read to Granny too and make her feel better. At first, Peter found reading hard, but Heidi was patient and encouraged him. She taught him the ABCs using a book from Clara, and soon he could read a few words. A few weeks later, Peter had learned a lot and could read to Granny. The whole village heard about how Heidi had taught Peter to read, and everyone was impressed by her dedication and teaching skills. With spring painting the mountains in vibrant green, Heidi and her grandfather returned to their mountain hut, surrounded by the beauty of nature's rebirth. It was a testament to the wonders of Heidi's mountain home. One day, Peter brought a letter to Heidi that filled her with joy. It was from Clara and her grandmama, letting Heidi know they would arrive in 6 weeks. Heidi was thrilled to see her dear friend again, but Peter had different feelings. He couldn't help but feel a bit jealous and frustrated. In June, the long-awaited day came. Clara and her grandmama approached the mountain. A man carefully pushed Clara's wheelchair, while another carried their things. Grandmama rode a horse, and they marveled at the breathtaking beauty of Heidi's mountain home. Clara couldn't hold back her tears as she wished she could run through the hills with Heidi. Her friend comforted her, saying, "Don't worry, Clara. I'll push you everywhere." Grandfather welcomed them warmly, serving large mugs of fresh goat's milk and delicious toasted cheese. They enjoyed their meal outside in the gentle sunshine and the pleasant breeze. When Clara admired Heidi's bed in the loft, she thought it must be amazing to look at the stars before falling asleep. Grandfather had an idea. He suggested that Grandmama could stay in the village while Clara stayed with them. Grandmama agreed because she thought it would be good for Clara's health. In the days that followed, Clara and Grandfather grew fond of each other. Grandfather asked Peter to make sure the goats ate the best grass so they could give Clara high-quality milk to help her get stronger. Heidi kept asking Grandfather to carry Clara to the mountaintop for a great view. But Grandfather said he'd only do it when Clara could stand on her own. Heidi shared this with Peter, which made him even more upset and angry. One morning, Peter rushed to the hut and saw Clara's empty wheelchair left outside. Peter, filled with frustration, kicked the wheelchair, and it tumbled down the mountainside. He ran away without hurting the goats. When Grandfather and Heidi came out of the hut, they couldn't find the wheelchair. They searched for it and found it broken into pieces down the mountain. Heidi thought it might have been the wind, but Clara started crying, saying she'd never reach the mountain top. Grandfather comforted Clara and promised to carry her to the peak. Then he went to find Peter, who was supposed to watch the goats. Grandfather scolded Peter for not doing his job and asked about the missing wheelchair. Peter just shook his head and denied everything. A few days later, as Clara's wheelchair had been broken, Grandfather put Clara on his back and carried her up to the mountains with Heidi and Peter. They arrived at a hill. Then Grandfather left Peter, Clara, and Heidi on the mountain as he went home for lunch. Heidi wanted to show Clara the most beautiful flowers. With Peter's help, Heidi and Peter started walking, and suddenly, far behind, Clara took a step and said, "I'm walking." She was amazed herself. When Grandfather came back, he was thrilled to see Clara walking, showing her determination and the mountain's healing power. Clara kept practicing and got better each day. Grandmama arrived a week later and was amazed by Clara's progress. She thanked Grandfather and Heidi for taking care of Clara and the mountain's fresh air that helped her. Grandfather suggested inviting Clara's father, Mr. Sesame, to see the incredible change. Mr. Sesame arrived at the hut, expecting to meet Clara and Heidi. As Clara ran towards him, he couldn't believe his eyes and said, "It's a miracle." He thanked Grandfather and Heidi for their wonderful care. Grandmama went to Peter, who had been hiding. She understood how he felt and offered her understanding. She hoped he would always cherish their time together. Finally, Mr. Sesame, Grandmama, and Clara left. Clara was sad to say goodbye, but Heidi assured her they would meet again when summer returned. Clara watched her friend from a distance while Heidi stood on the mountain, waving until they were out of sight.